Berserk Boy has been one of my most anticipated indie games of the past few years. And how could it not? I mean, it hits all the right notes for me. A gorgeous pixel art platformer with impressively animated effects, a blend of classic Mega Man and Sonic style gameplay I grew up on, and a high-octane soundtrack to match. So when I was sent a review copy, I couldn't wait to jump in. And once I did, I was pleasantly surprised that Berserk Boy very much lived up to the hype and expectations. With its fast-paced platforming and combat, a unique moveset that often doubles as offensive attacks and mobility options for platforming, and extremely well-thought-out level design, Berserk Boy blends the best elements of classic Sonic and Mega Man. But it does so without many of the pain points that often came with these two series. And the way each of these inspirations are implemented makes Berserk Boy feel like its own unique and finely tuned experience. And with it out now on PC and Switch, I'm excited to share my experience with you all. So let's break down how this much anticipated indie game achieves this. Starting with the core gameplay, platforming is fast and fluid, and at times really implements Sonic-like movements where you have grind rails and a dash attack that finishes with a little bounce back off the target. And much like Mega Man, you'll be collecting Berserk orbs through your playthrough, each giving you new suits and abilities. The lightning ability, for example, allows you to dash and bounce off of enemies, tagging them so you can then send a shockwave to them for heavy damage. Flame Drill gives you some strong attack power, but at the cost of it being a mostly ground-focused set of skills, and it doesn't have the same vertical mobility as others. Ice Kunai lets you throw, well, kunai, and perform some continuous dashes through enemies. Soaring Wind gives you the option to fly, but gives you mostly ineffective attacks and dashes. And Mindbuster lets you scan enemies to send a homing missilette. Each of these abilities uses up energy, but unlike OG Mega Man, this bar gets refilled on its own fairly quickly, and immediately by collecting these tokens that appear frequently throughout stages and often upon destroying enemies. This is a really smart system that never limits the player, as I only ever found myself running out of energy when I was carelessly mashing and missing enemies in combat scenarios. These tokens also act like currency used for the game's various upgrades, so it's always worth collecting any you find. Each of these suits also have their own special ability, where once your Berserk meter is full, you can go Berserk and perform a flashy move. This can be satisfying to throw into a fight, but it really isn't game-changing. You can easily get through the game while never bothering to use them at all. Now with each of these unique orbs and suits, you can either quickly scroll through them for whichever ability you need to keep the game pace moving, or you can bring up the scroll wheel to stop the game for a second and give you time to select what you need for the specific situation. It's a really simple system, but having these options are really nice. They can get tricky to get used to at first, but once you do, chaining together your attacks and swapping orbs on the fly results in some really incredible combos that make combat feel extremely satisfying, although it can make it feel easy as your skills eventually outpace any threat the enemies impose. And these are just as far as attacks and movement goes. Each orb comes with its other unique elements, such as the lightning's ability to power these buttons and doors, or how you can dash through these things, often leading to hidden rooms, or Ice Kunai's ability to hang onto certain platforms, or continuously dash through these lanterns. The Flame Drill has these brilliant sections where you maneuver through these specific dirt tiles, and in a terrific design choice, the ability auto-triggers when you're moving towards it, no matter which of the orbs you're currently using. This leads to these very fluid sections where you're going between platforming to drilling to platforming again, and it results in some of the most fluid and fun elements of the game, in my opinion. And since each of these are unlocked via boss fights, more on that later, all of these new abilities allow for further exploration of previously played levels, making revisiting stages feel more engaging and worthwhile. Well, for the most part, but more on that later. While the combat and movement feels great, it would be meaningless without good level design. Luckily, this is where I think Berserk Boy shines the most. Many of the abilities play a pivotal role in most levels, requiring you to switch up what you need on the fly. And at the same time, there are these pads that auto-switch your suit to match the ability you'll need for the room. These are placed sparingly and in really smart ways, like how it can be in the middle of a platform section, so the player isn't unexpectedly thrown into a situation they aren't ready for. Now the game is fully linear. There's no page taken out of Mega Man's playbook here where you are free to play levels in any order, but this ends up being a good deviation from its inspiration, as I think it's what leads to Berserk Boy having very focused and clever level design. New abilities are presented and taught at the right time before building up to the point where you have to quickly swap between them to clear a room. While the game contains just 15 or so levels, I was really impressed with how big some of these were, and that's impressive considering the speed and flow at which the game plays. Each level also has checkpoints for you to warp between once they're unlocked. And each level has collectible Berserk medals to find, sometimes requiring you to complete a small platforming or combat challenge, or sometimes they're just hidden in an easy-to-miss area. These aren't entirely optional as there is an in-game need for a certain number of them, but I won't spoil what that is exactly. There's also resistance members hidden throughout the stages. Finding and interacting with them increases your resistance gauge. Reaching 60% in a level unlocks an extra room or two, usually containing another Berserk medal. And finding all of them in one level unlocks a short bonus time trial stage. These optional time trials are a nice way of showcasing the game's movement system, as it feels great to quickly maneuver through them. And they're a nice reward for those who want to do everything in each level. Another way the Mega Man inspiration seeps into the gameplay is in its boss fights. The game features 5 or so main bosses, which is how you unlock the new abilities. And there's a few mini-bosses that add some nice variety to the game as well. Bosses are mostly well designed and give a satisfying conclusion to a set of levels, but at times they do reuse some noticeably similar mechanics between them. They eventually go berserk when low on health, using their own special move, which adds an exciting end to the fight. And another area Berserk Boy excels at is in its music. To go along with the Sonic inspirations, Berserk Boy fittingly includes originally composed tracks by T. Lopes for the game. In case you don't know, T has worked on the soundtrack for Sonic Mania, TMT Shredder's Revenge, Streets of Rage 4, and the list goes on. It's an excellent soundtrack that complements the game really well, with several tracks capturing a very Sonic Mania-esque vibe. So overall, Berserk Boy does a lot of things really well. But with that said, it isn't perfect, and there were a few points for me that felt like obvious missteps, so let's talk about them. For one, the Ice Kunai ability of continuously dashing into the lanterns felt really unintuitive to me. For a while I assumed I had to adjust the direction I wanted to go as I was coming in contact with one, and adjust it for everyone after that, which felt like a very small window of time. Naturally I was making the wrong inputs, so I would dash directly into spikes or pits, and it was in this section I finally realized you were supposed to just let go of the control stick completely once you dash into the first lantern, and would then just go on autopilot for you until you reach these little points where it circles around. Of course, once you know this, it's no longer a problem, but still, I found myself having a lot of trouble with it until I reached this point, and I could see many others running into the same scenario. And that's honestly not as bad as what I have as my next grade. With the need for levels to be re-explored for those wanting to do everything, I wish you could go back into them with every checkpoint available at the start. Instead, you have to replay the full level, and this quickly starts to feel tedious. In some of the levels, you unlock a new ability after beating the boss at the end, and often this ability could be used earlier on that same level for some secrets. But since you get kicked out of the level upon beating the boss, it feels really bad to have to go through the full level again if you want to jump back in immediately just to see one specific area, or to collect a Berserk medal that feels gated behind an ability you don't have for seemingly no reason but to force you to come back to the stage. I understand this would impact the rankings at the end of the level, but still, I wish it was an option to go in to explore and collect medals or resistance members and just not get a rating. But all in all, these are still pretty minor criticisms in an otherwise amazing game that will be adored by many of the fans who have been following its development for years. The good heavily outweighs the bad here. Now, while there is a story here, it isn't its strongest point. It's pretty straightforward, a bit corny at times, but the characters are still fairly charming, especially with their occasional small voice-acted lines.
Mindbuster! Go berserk!
I won't go too much into details, but it still had some surprising and satisfying moments, and these story-related scenes and conversations don't last too long, so you can quickly get back into the action. As far as game length goes, it took me about 9 hours to beat the game and roll credits. This included revisiting some stages, only unlocking a few of the time trial stages, and it did not include getting all the Berserk medals, so if I had to guess, I would expect most people could probably squeeze out at least 12 to 15 hours or so out of this game, if they wanted to do everything and not rush through it. But to me, this felt like the perfect length for Berserk Boy, as it really felt like the game left no room for fluff, and the level design, boss encounters, and gameplay mechanics are all designed very tightly, resulting in a very focused, polished, and satisfying platformer. I was really surprised with how refined and polished almost every aspect of the game is. It feels great to play with satisfying attacks and abilities to unlock, and there's a lot to explore in these big levels. And I could easily see myself coming back to this game just because it feels really fun to play through with only a few weak points. So if you're looking for something that feels really refreshing yet somewhat reminiscent of these other guys, you are going to love this. I dropped a link to the Steam and eShop pages, and if you like this review, please subscribe for more like this, and let me know if you're picking up Berserk Boy in the comments. But that's it for me. I'm Colonel Dupes, and I'll catch you in the next one.